Welcome to this video about an introduction to ADHD, part 2 of 4, identifying signs. What behaviours might teachers notice? He's very easily distracted. She just seems to never settle. They are so restless. He's extremely fidgety. They are very noisy. He's continually on the go. She frequently interrupts and talks out of turn. These are all examples of difficulties that pupils with ADHD commonly present with. However, these behaviours alone are not enough to develop a hypothesis that a pupil may have ADHD. Some initial considerations. ADHD and indicators and traits of ADHD are generally quite common within schools. We can think of the presentation of ADHD-type difficulties and ADHD itself as a higher incidence, SEN. ADHD occurs across the range of intellectual abilities. Some medical experts refer to it as being on a spectrum. ADHD affects pupils in different ways, and there are many variables. Teachers and parents may also sometimes too readily attribute a pupil's difficulties to ADHD. There may be other factors to consider. A good indication of the severity and persistence of ADHD-type difficulties can be gained by monitoring how a pupil responds to classroom-based strategies and intervention. Identifying needs is a process, not an event. It is entwined with teaching, support, and intervention as part of the graduated approach. Signs of inattention. Does not give close attention to detail. Easily distracted by external stimuli. Easily off task, changes or flits from one activity to another. Makes careless mistakes. Does not seem to listen when being spoken to. Does not follow instructions. Does not complete tasks. Very poor organizational skills. Avoids tasks that require mental effort. Often loses items that are required for routine tasks. Forgetful in daily activities. And disorganized generally. Signs of hyperactivity. Unable to sit still for long. Often up and out of their seat. Runs, climbs, jumps, etc. when inappropriate. Fidgety with hands and feet. Is often on the go and has boundless energy. And very restless generally. Signs of impulsivity. Difficulties with taking turns, for example, cannot wait in a line. Talks excessively. Often interrupts conversations and activities. Is noisy when engaging in activities. And takes actions prematurely or without apparent thought, which may sometimes appear to be random. What parents might say. The common signs of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity may be noticed within the home and other settings outside school. Parents may notice these signs in different ways, for example, persistent difficulties with getting to sleep. This is very common. Disorganization in daily household and personal care routines. Not being able to focus for long in most recreational activities, even those activities that are of high personal interest. Behaviours which are somewhat contained within school and then unleashed at home, for example, losing their temper. Risk-taking behaviours that are not typically an issue in school. And apparent sensory integration difficulties that may be more obvious in other settings, for example at events, on family holidays, etc. Especially with very young children, it's important to bear in mind that most of the signs of ADHD are also signs of the typical stages of development. How girls might present differently. Girls may have fewer hyperactive or impulsive symptoms, and more inattentive symptoms when compared with boys. They are also less likely to be disruptive and so can fade somewhat into the background, especially when younger. It is helpful to consider how the three types of signs of ADHD may present differently in some girls. For example, daydreaming and drifting down a rabbit hole of interest, not noticing the passing of time. Seen as being very chatty. Fidgets in different ways, for example, frequent hair twirling. overenthusiastic and overly engaged, and then suddenly not. Easily distracted by other people's conversations. Seen by others as direct or rude because of interjecting in conversations and drifting off when people are talking to them, which may lead to peer rejection, conflict, or bullying. Enthusiastic decision-making, saying yes to too many things. A perfectionist who puts pressure on themselves, working much harder to achieve because they're not sure of how hard they need to work, leading to burnout cycles. Starting too many things at once and then not finishing them. Frequent upset that may be more obviously expressed, for example, crying. And expresses their ruminating thoughts and anxieties more readily, linked possibly with feelings that they need to cover up their mistakes. What is the presenting behaviour telling us? ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition that affects around 5% of the population. It is not a behaviour disorder. This means that a pupil with ADHD may not necessarily present with behaviour that challenges, and most pupils presenting with challenging behaviour do not have ADHD. There are a wide range of possible factors and causes behind the behaviours that challenge in school, and many strategies which can support a pupil, school staff, and parents and carers to behave differently. Learning how to behave can be a trial and error process. The key question to ask is, what are their behaviours communicating to us that they cannot put into words? Are they feeling frustrated, anxious, scared, angry? And why might this be the case? Other possible areas of need. Sometimes a pupil who is suspected to have ADHD may have one or more underlying needs, some of which may be other types of special educational needs. Many of the traits that we've outlined so far in the areas of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity may be presenting difficulties for pupils who have one or more SEND that has not yet been considered, screened, or assessed. This includes specific learning difficulties such as dyslexia, dyspraxia, working memory difficulties, processing difficulties, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia. Speech and language needs such as receptive language difficulties, expressive language difficulties, pragmatic language difficulties, developmental language disorder, and auditory processing disorder. Autism. Other social, emotional, mental health needs such as anxiety, attachment difficulties, post-traumatic stress disorder, and obsessive-compulsive disorder, and sensory processing difficulties. It can be beneficial to also consider any possibilities that could be addressed by health professionals. For example, whether the pupil's vision and hearing has been checked, if they have a sleep disorder, if there are any other medical factors, for example, chromosomal abnormalities, tics, etc. For younger children especially, if they have been developmentally delayed, and for adolescents especially, if there are issues relating to puberty or risk-taking behaviours, for example, misusing substances. Co-occurring conditions. A co-occurring condition is known medically as a comorbidity. Research suggests that a significant proportion of people diagnosed with ADHD have a co-occurring addition, typically other neurodevelopmental conditions such as specific learning difficulties, for example dyslexia and dyspraxia, and autism. So ADHD does not travel alone. This means that signs, traits, and symptoms can overlap, and it can be confusing for professionals and parents and carers. ADHD and/or autism. People often confuse ADHD and autism presentations because there are some similarities, and also because ADHD and autism can co-occur. There are, however, some distinct features of both conditions. Autism is characterized by persistent difficulties in social interaction and communication, and the presence of stereotypic, that is, rigid and repetitive, behaviors, resistance to change, and restricted interests. A pupil on the autism spectrum may have delayed or advanced speech difficulties. They will struggle with understanding the meaning behind language, for example, metaphors and humour. Some autistic pupils can spend hours doing the same things, including repetitive actions. They may find changes and interruptions distressing. they may also develop obsessions that last longer than is developmentally appropriate. Taking a deeper look. If you've raised concerns about a pupil and you are spotting some signs of difficulties that could be associated with ADHD, it can be helpful to provide additional or more specific information and review routinely available school data. In lessons, following, preceding, or alongside the activities involved in taking a deeper look, it's essential to also examine the pupil's experiences in lessons. For example, are some of the reported difficulties, which may be variable across subjects, linked with any issues that you can identify relating to your knowledge and awareness of the pupil's capabilities, expectations of what the pupil can achieve, use of assessment information and data, and use of differentiation strategies as part of high-quality teaching for all? If the answer is yes or maybe, it's important then to consider the adjustments you can make to remove or reduce the pupil's barriers to learning in your lessons. Using checklists. If you are starting to develop a hypothesis that a pupil may have ADHD, and/or if you are coordinating the early identification of needs in other areas of SEND, for example dyslexia and autism, you may feel that it's now appropriate to use one or more SEN checklists. Checklists are a list of statements or questions that seek to identify a pattern of traits or difficulties based on the responses given. While SEN checklists are somewhat subjective and they do rely on the individual completing them, for example a teacher, to understand the questions and statements and to respond honestly, they do provide a useful early step towards identification, and they are free to use. Basic ADHD Traits Checklist. You can use a basic and initial ADHD traits checklist covering a simple and concise list of traits. This is suitable for using with teachers and any support staff who know the pupil well. Talking with the pupil and their parents and carers. At this point, you may have collated a range of evidence. You may feel that it would be helpful to discuss your concerns with the pupil, if age appropriate, and their parents and carers. This could include a review of the available school-based evidence that we've outlined so far in this video. Sometimes it can also be helpful and interesting to gently explore whether there is any known history of ADHD. Other possible areas of need might also be discussed, alongside classroom strategies and any additional provision. It is important to be clear, if using the word ADHD, that at this stage it might be considered a possibility, but this requires further exploration as part of the graduated approach to SEN identification. This is the end of this video. Parts 3 and 4 on this topic are now available to watch. You can view more videos on this channel in the About series.